So indeed, we are another project that has been approved. So ScaleAgdata, the whole purpose of ScaleAgdata is, the title is Scaling Agricultural Sensor Data for an Improved Monitoring of the Agri-Environmental Conditions. So it's a bit of a mouthful. Just to give you a short overview, so it was a response to the call in the Governance 111 call, so where the focus was on upscaling real-time sensor data. We started in January as well for a duration of 4 years with 26 partners and 6 research and innovation labs. We have quite a good coverage over Europe, but I will come back to that later as well. So what's the purpose of ScaleAgdata? In agriculture, farmers are using more and more sensor data in the field to drive their operations, to obtain information on their production system. And there's a huge potential in using that data for monitoring purposes. But it's really hard to get access to this data. So what we will try to do in this project is, on the one hand, making the data available. So that's one of the first components, is really how can we organize these complex data streams? How should they be governed and organized, since this part of the governance call. So it's quite a big part of the project. So it's really more on the practicalities, looking at data standards, making it available, business models behind sharing data, and so on. And then the second part is, once or assuming all this data becomes available, what can we really do with this data? And so it's really getting the most out of it, both for the farmer as well as for other stakeholders as well. So that's really the two big components of the ScaleAgdata project. The objectives, so we basically have 5 objectives. On the one hand, it's really looking at innovative approaches for collecting in situ data at the sensor level, but also other ways of collecting data within the field. And then the second objective is the next logical step is, if you are collecting all this data, how can you start sharing it across the entire value chain? So it's not only at the farm level, but it's really across the entire value chain that we will be looking. So how can we improve the sharing of this data? And then, as I mentioned before, we want to demonstrate the added value of all this data, but we will do it at 2 different levels. On the one hand, once all this data becomes available, and I think it's specifically objective 3 that might be of interest to Tools for CAP as well, is using this data to really do regional monitoring. How can we improve monitoring products at the national, regional or European level? And here the main focus will be on satellite data, so Earth observation products that are either not feasible yet because of the in situ data is not there yet, or where we know the accuracy is not always that high because in certain regions the available in situ data is quite low. So that's one component. The second demonstration component is, how can all this data be used to the benefit of the farmer? So it's not only to upscale it to the regional monitoring tools, but also really for the farmer, if he is using sensor data, what's in it for him? Like, which parts of his production can he start improving? Not only in the fields with the sensor data, but also in his neighboring fields. And that's also the second part, is how can this data be used for farmers that are not using sensor data? So it's to look a bit at, you have very advanced farmers that are using a lot of data, but can we also use the data from these advanced farmers to help the farmers that are not really capable yet of investing in this technology? That's all part of objective 4. And then objective 5 is, once we have all these improved products, how can it really be used for the agricultural sector in general? So not only for the farmers, but also for other players, but I will come back to that later on. So there is a research component behind it. We will be demonstrating a lot of the innovations that we bring, and for that we need very specific use cases which are organized in research and innovation labs. So we have 6 research and innovation labs in the project, and here it's really where we will look for the innovations and demonstrate them in real-life applications. We have them organized in 6 topics. So water productivity, really looking at how can we make irrigation more efficient, how can you get more production for a given amount of water. We will look at crop management. So there's a few sub plots included, but that's really looking at improving the production in general, but also getting more information for reporting more efficiently in terms of, for example, pesticide use and so on. Yield monitoring is collaborating with with the harvesting machines, for example, to get access to that data and really get better yield estimations at different levels, so within field, but also at the field level, regional level, national level, and so on. Soil health is looking at sensor data used really to monitor certain components of the soil and looking at how we can upscale these informations again at the higher level. Looking at, for example, soil organic carbon as one of the indicators. In grasslands, there we have two sub-pilots again, both in Spain as in Italy. And looking there at how we can mainly look at the biomass production and the carbon cycle, getting more information on that component using the sensor data. And the last one is sustained dairy, where we look at not only at the field level, but also really at the dairy production system as a whole and how we can get better monitoring tools there. When we looked at these different research labs, we really tried to get a lot of variation in there because it's a research project, so the TRL levels are quite low, but we really want to include both applications still in the research level, but also certain operational services which are already in place, commercial sensors, commercial advisory services that are using sensor data to really see how we can get some advancements there as well. So it's variation in geography, so all over Europe, variation in crops, the sensor types, maturity, and so on. We have 7 innovation areas, so really where we try to increase the TRL levels. So we're looking at new sensors. So there was a specific remark on making sure it's not only on existing technology, but also seeing what could be beneficial new technology as well. Edge processing is a big component because sensors generate a lot of data and it's really hard to share all this raw data. So it's also looking at how can you transform data into information already at the sensor level and then only sharing that specific information. Data sharing architecture and data governance, like mentioned before, here it's really looking at how to set up this sharing infrastructure and how we can organize sharing all the data across different players. There are some specific innovation areas on the satellite part, so both improving the satellite data itself, as well as improving information products coming from that satellite data, like, for example, better soil moisture estimates, yield estimates, and so on. And then the privacy preserving is really looking at how we can include AI-specific technologies that allow the use of all this data, but also at the same time looking at preserving the privacy of the data owners so that we can use all this data without really breaching some of the privacy issues. And there's a specific research topic in the AI world that we try to include here as well. And then data integration methodologies is really looking at how to get the best of two worlds. So we have a lot of EO research already ongoing, and how can we really improve that research with the real-time component of the sensor data, for example, improving real-time soil moisture products, which are already existing with, for example, soil moisture coming from sensor data. So how can we improve one set of data using data coming from the sensors? So what's the overall concept, maybe to conclude a bit, is we are organized in the research labs. So that's really our top layer in the project. We are looking at the different environmental dimensions. You have sensors collecting data on the soil components, on the water component, and on the air component, specifically on the crop and livestock as well. So that's where all the data is being generated from the sensors. Each research lab that I mentioned, the 6 before, they are using sensors that measure something in one of these environmental dimensions. Some of them are using the same type of sensors, some of them are using completely different sensors. For example, soil moisture sensors are one of the types that come back quite often. And then within the research labs, they will see how this data can be used for the farmer and how to make it accessible to other players. So that's really what happened within the research labs. here we do the innovations on the sensors and the services towards farmers. And then at the next level, once this data becomes available, you have EU service providers and other players looking at what to do with this data. And they look at innovations, like I mentioned before, how to improve, for example, satellite data to really go to regional or continental monitoring products. So that's what's happening at the next level. So it means as an outcome, you have the ScaleAgdata EU-wide data products that provide information on the agro-environmental conditions. That's one part of the project. But then another important, then we have to go to the right of the figure is, once we have these data products like soil moisture, yield estimates, biomass, and so on, what can we do with it? If you look at the arrow going back up for the farmer. So once we have these improved data products, what can we do with it for the farmer? But also what can we do, and that's the arrow going down, what can we do it for other players in agriculture? Looking at the crop monitoring, of course, insurance as well, financial sector, policymakers, and so on. So that's really what's the added value of all this data for these different types of players. So on the left hand, it's really more the technological innovations. On the right hand, it's mainly the innovative use of all this data that we will be looking at. So the consortium, like I mentioned, we are 26 partners from 14 countries. We are a bit working on different fronts. So really more at the infrastructure side, we have quite a bit of partners, technology providers, research institutes and universities, but also like machinery and data providers, the agri-food professional organizations. We also have somebody from the insurance, agricultural insurances, that will be looking at the data, and a think tank as well to help us making the link with policymakers and so on. So with this, I conclude, and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions later on, feel free to contact me directly or just the project in general. Thank you very much.